hello, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to have you here, the Director General for Climate Diplomacy, Economy and Technology of the Federal and Foreign Office in Berlin, in the place of Deputy Minister who had some other obligation. Mr. Rentschler, I just need to note that we have 20 minutes time. I have 7 or 8 questions, so I would really like us to be as succinct as possible so that we can cover as much ground as possible. Is this okay with you? All right, thank you very much. Obviously, for Germany and Europe in general, the issue of green transition has become increasingly important, especially after the war in Ukraine. Could you please give us a very brief explanation of why it is important for Europe to diversify its energy and move to a greener future?
Thank you very much, and let me start by not only thanking you for having me, but also by extending best wishes from State Minister Löhmann. She had to go to Parliament. We have a plenary debate at this moment on the events in Sudan, the unfolding there of this crisis, and she needed to represent the Foreign Ministry. So thanks for having me, and indeed for putting this highly relevant item on the agenda. I think the let's say, necessity for green transition, for moving away from fossil dependency and towards a more sustainable and therefore renewable energy has best been summarized by the Secretary General of the United Nations when he said earlier this year that the humanity is heading towards collective suicide if it stays hooked on fossil, because the simple fact is that the temperatures keep rising. We're currently living in what we could call a 1.1 degree world, so we are already at 1.1 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and if nothing happens, then we will, that's according to scientists from the IPCC, end up in a world with more than 3 degrees temperature rising above the pre-industrial level. And we have seen with what we have now, 1.1, the dramatic impact in many parts of the world, including southern Europe with wildfires, with droughts. Germany has seen floods that were really unseen before. And of course, globally, look at Pakistan last year, where up to a third of the country was flooded. So I think the necessity to move away from fossil and towards renewables is clear. It's really a question of the survival of humanity, if one can call it in this drastic way. Our minister, Federal Minister Baerbock, speaks not longer of climate change, but of a climate crisis that we're living. So I think it's clear that we need to move for the mere reason of having safe livings all over the world. But the war that Russia waged against Ukraine has given a second reason to this imperative. There's a climate imperative to move away from fossil, but there's now also an energy security imperative. The dependency on fossils and fossils coming from that particular part of the world has also exposed us and exposed weaknesses. So I think apart from the climate imperative, there's also a security imperative to move towards renewables, because those we can let's say get from various sources and even provide ourselves, sun, solar energy, wind, water. I think that's something that's much more decentralized.
Okay, the necessity might be very clear, and very few people denying that exists, but still there are very important practical problems. So, for example, the EU and the G7 have set very ambitious goals for 2050, but still we see that countries, including Germany, which some members of its coalition demand, for example, concessions for the car industry. There's other EU countries that demand other concessions for their own industries. How hopeful are you that there can be a united front and that Europe can play a leading role in this? Or if, on the other hand, parochial or, if you like, national interests prevail in the short term, at the detriment of longer-term solutions that you, as you just explained, are vital for the survival of the planet and our species, essentially.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. I think you put your emphasis here on a very important point, which is that, of course, there will be costs to this transition. In the long term, I always say the cost of non-action is much higher than the cost of acting, but there are costs. Let's face it. There will also be sectors of the society, there will be certain industries that will either be worse off or need to adjust in a way that is maybe more demanding than in other sectors. But there's, of course, also a lot to be gained. And this fact that it's uneven when it comes to the cost of the transition. And also, honestly speaking, it's uneven when it comes to the impact of the climate crisis. Ultimately, we will all be hit, but it's obvious that some regions are hit more drastically than others. That means, of course, that the starting position of countries inside the European Union, but also outside, when it comes to how exactly achieve the goal, are different. I think there cannot be any difference about the goal that we need to achieve. I think that must be clear, and it is clear. But there are, of course, differences of view when it comes to how do we get there, and that has simply to do with the business model, so to speak, the economic model. Countries are relying on different sources of energy. They have different exposures when it comes to industry and so on. But that's normal for the European Union. We always, when we start discussing, start with 27 different positions. And then the process of finding compromises, of, let's say, also coming up with fair, equitable solutions starts. And so far, we've always managed to come up with those results. And I'm very, very confident that this will also be true now. We have this really groundbreaking Fit for 55 package. It's transformative, really. This is policy making, which also leads the global effort by example. And while it took a lot of negotiation and compromise finding to get there, now that we have that compromise and now that we have a common ground and have translated that into binding legislation, I think there is no question that this will also be implemented by all. So I think it's a natural process. I think the transition, as it's called, is by its very nature very demanding task, but the determination is absolutely there, and the Fit for 55 is an example of that, with quite a number of very demanding legislative proposals.
But still, we see that the IEA or other agencies say that according to the state policy scenario, we are not going to be able to avoid this catastrophic rise of global temperatures, and that a lot more needs to be done. Also, for example, in investing in renewables, where we currently see that countries like Germany or the rich world, including China, take a very big share in this kind of investment, whereas the developing world, or I don't know how you want to call it, or emerging economies, are falling behind and even protesting that we are suffering from your prosperity, the Western prosperity, and not much is being done about us. So my question is, first of all, what more needs to be done in order to achieve those goals? And also, how can we make this transition to be also fair and equitable for the entire planet? Because this is not something that concerns just Greece or Germany or advanced economies, right?
No, again, you're absolutely right. And I would even say the responsibility is very much on the side of those that have historically been and are currently also still the big emitters. And historically, for example, Germany, one needs to be as honest as that, as an industrialized country, has a responsibility for around 4% of the global emissions so far. Of course, of late, and due to the measures already taken, this rate has gone down a lot. In the actual current yearly emission, the entire European Union collectively accounts for some 9% of yearly global emissions. China by its own 30%. US has a very high figure here, and it's those countries that are providing those emissions that are first and foremost responsible also for now investing in the transition. I would say, on the other hand, those that are most affected are classically those that are not responsible. The figure that we know is that 9 out of the 10 most affected countries are on the African continent. So they pay a price for past policies, particularly, but also current ones, still in the what we would call then the
So is the EU doing anything to address this, especially given the projections that there will be like billions of climate refugees coming to Europe
I didn't quite get the question now, but still on the previous one, because this is probably the big question mark in this. How do we make sure that there is just transition?
Just transition, exactly.
Word. And for this, flows of finance have to go from north to south. It's as simple as that. Because of this, let's say, historic responsibility, but also because really the number of people that are affected possibly will also then have to leave their homes is quite breathtaking, and is particularly in the south. So what is happening is, I would claim money. There is enough money around. If you look at the number of investments in fossil, which last year was still at around 890 billion US dollars. So there is money that's invested in fossil. If we manage to transfer that to renewables, then we would already be a big step further. But we will, and this is the point I wanted to make, also have to finance both on the mitigation side, but on the adaptation side and on loss and damage, with financial flows from the north to the south. I think that's very clear. There's a commitment by the industrialized countries to spend.
I'm sorry, can you be a little bit more quiet,
every year on climate related issues, and that's not yet honored, that promise, and that needs to happen.
This gives me a great opportunity to move to the second subject. I mean, in Greece, there's been huge expectations about mythical gas reserves and oil reserves in the Aegean and this Mediterranean. This is the same for Turkey, etc. The Greek government just licensed ExxonMobil to do drilling exercises. France is building new nuclear reactors, even as Germany is decommissioning its last ones. So I was wondering, in the German government's view, is there a place for fossil fuels and nuclear energy in this transition, or in this effort, or is this counterproductive, and you think it should be abandoned? What is your position on this?
Yeah, I think here I would make a distinction between the short, the medium, and the long term, because in the long term, for the reasons given, I think there is just simply no future for fossils, because it is the cause for these rising temperatures, and it is over time to be replaced with renewables. However, it's also clear and we would all be living in a sort of naive understanding of reality if we would dream of a transition overnight. It cannot happen. There needs to be bridging technologies, bridging solutions, and that is exactly where my sense is that let's say gas, LNG can play a role. It's really about helping in the transition period. It is about making sure that as we move towards sustainable, long-term, sustainable, viable, but also in the long run, profitable, secure energy provision, gas needs to be a bridging solution, a bridging technology, but with a clear understanding that over time it needs to also be phased out. And when it comes to nuclear, Germany has just earlier this month really
decommissioned the plants,
finished
right?
its use of nuclear. And it's again something where we believe it's not sustainable, it's not secure. There is a long-term question about the waste, and particularly when it comes to new nuclear power plants, which are now planned and perceived, they will not help us, because by the time they are ready for use, I think we need to really be fully into this new world of renewables.
But the same stands for fossil fuels in the Aegean and East Med, right? This is a long-term project. It's not going to provide immediate relief to the energy mixture in those countries,
I mean,
right?
immediate not, long-term neither. I would really go for the medium term, because if you look at the again the ambitions, I mean, Germany itself has set its goal for 2045 climate neutrality.
Right.
For the European Union, that stands at 2050. I would still think this is what you could call medium to beginning of long term, but this is also more or less the time horizon where it's clear that climate neutrality can only be achieved with renewables.
Right.
So I think it's not for tomorrow.
But in principle, the German government is not against Greece exploring its possibilities of drilling and finding reserves of natural gas and oil in its territory.
Yeah, I think the issue here is really that the time horizon needs to also be for those that are investing in those explorations, such that within the time frame that I've given, the return on that investment will happen, because politically otherwise there may be this risk of stranded assets, and that of course is something which everyone wants to avoid. I think the companies, the market actors need to really assess carefully how the dynamic that we see, and it's not only the political framework, also you can sense this in the society, the young generation, the pressure will only mount towards exiting fossil.
I will pick up, we only have a minute and a half just for this. How will this green transition affect our societies? And I don't mean just in terms of the environment, but also of the skills needed, of what people should study, of how our economies will be transformed. Do you have a message to the countries how they should maybe recalibrate their education systems, their university systems, their educational systems? What kind of workers we're going to need, scientists and stuff like that? This is going to be a larger paradigm shift, or is it not just isolated in the energy sector? What is your view on that?
Yeah, I agree. This is affecting, let's say, every walk of life, so to speak. But what I would send as a first message is one of really optimism that this transition will create a lot of new opportunities. I think we have studies that in Germany alone, this will create 400,000 new jobs, and that is qualified jobs. And I would also say that beyond the pure labor market, what we are looking at is a kind of more quality world, because air pollution will be reduced. There will ultimately be really better environment in every sense. So there's a lot to gain. When I said before, it's not without pain. I think that's part of the discussion. We need an honest debate. We cannot promise that it will all be a walk in the park. It's really a transition that some call even a disruption in a certain way, but let it make a smart disruption, and that needs indeed all actors and the whole of society approach. But at the end, I think we really have a chance to be better off, and B, there is no alternative. I mean, the drastic consequences of climate change should really be a warning in that sense.
Thank you so much. I think we I think we're the first ones who made it in time. So thank you so much. This has been a very interesting discussion. And I wish you...
Thank you very much, and have a good continuation of your conference.
I wish you all the best. Goodbye.